Hello, everybody, and this episode is a special episode of GardenDC. It is our 250th episode. Yay! Put up some sparklers. So if you're listening on audio, great. We are also making this a video episode, so you can watch this on YouTube and Spotify and a couple other platforms. It'll be available in the video format as well this time. And joining me for this episode are the 3 summer interns for Washington Gardener for summer 2025. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves, starting with Colin.
Hello, my name is Colin Davan. I'm from Massachusetts, grew up about 45 minutes outside of Boston in the town of Hopkinton. Before moving to DC, I go to American University now. I'm a rising senior studying journalism and history. And this summer I'm interning at the Washington Gardener. In the garden, currently I'm growing some cucumbers and some zucchini and squash. And then for the internship, I've been editing the podcast, editing some of the plant profiles, and writing a few profile stories and other interesting articles that you got to check out.
Yay, thanks, Colin. How about you next, Ian?
Hey everyone, my name is Ian Ferris, and I'm from Maryland, Severna Park, pretty close by to Silver Spring, where the home of this magazine is and podcast. And I am a rising senior at the University of Maryland. I study journalism and sustainable agriculture, and I've been interning with the Washington Gardener this summer, doing a lot of the same as Colin has been doing, editing podcasts and videos and writing some interesting articles. Right now I'm working on one on a mushroom farm that I found super fascinating.
Yay, and Miguel, you're next.
Hi, I am Miguel Zarate, or Zarate. I'm a Maryland native going to University of Maryland for my I'm a fifth year senior, and I'm interning with the Washington Gardener this year to bulk up that resume, And I've done a lot of writing in the book reviews, and we did an article about cannabis, which was a lot of fun to do research for. But yeah, it's just been a lot of general reporting. I've done some podcast editing as well.
Right, thank you. And so the interns have come up with some questions for me, and we're going to theme this episode as all tips, no tricks, garden hacks. And we're going to start off the Q&A round with Colin.
I figured because we're gardening in the city, the Washington, D.C. city, so I thought I'd ask a question kind of relating to that of how do you deal with rats and mice in the urban garden environments?
Yikes. So starting off with a really tough problem. So I would say the first advice I would give is to keep everything as sanitary and cleaned up as possible. So any fallen or dropped fruit, that includes tomatoes on the ground, anything that could be rat food, we don't want to have that laying around. And that includes, animal waste as well, because rats love dog poop. Notoriously, that's like rat candy. So I don't think you're going to have that in your garden anyway, but just be extra scrupulous if you have rats around to clean up every little bit of waste that you can. And then you want to lock up anything that is potentially edible in your garden supplies. So that could be anything from grass seed to the bird seed that you're feeding the birds. Sorry, you're probably not going to be able to feed birds if you have a rat infestation. The rats are going to find the bird seed, but if you still want to have that in storage, put it in metal or glass. Rats and mice can chew through everything else. And then your next step to keep out rats and mice would be to use some type of metal barriers. So that would be hardware cloth, which is the thin gauge metal type fencing. Very easy to bend, very easy to cut. If you use something, say, like chicken wire, any mouse especially is going to be able to get through that, but most rats would also be able to bridge that. So you can make little screened fences around things. You could bury the hardware cloth and then plant on top of that. Same thing with your compost pile. You're going to probably have to compost in a metal container, like an old metal garbage can with holes drilled in the side for oxygen and for letting out extra liquid, but not letting in vermin.
Interesting. Awesome. And just building off that question, Which critters do you find give you the most trouble, especially in the Fenton garden?
So in our Fenton community garden, we've had a serious rise in the rabbit population over the last few years. The first few years, 0 rabbits. And then it was like a hawk dumped one or fell it out of the sky and it just plopped in our garden. And then they've been having babies there ever since. So they are a bit of a problem because we are growing organically there. So we can't use too many repellents unless it's an organic repellent. And even then, I would be averse probably to using most things in the community garden that would affect my neighbors' plots as well. So you just do your best, again, with the hardware cloth and trying to screen what you can that the rabbits love, which is especially green bean seedlings. They love to just mow the seedlings down, and you never get even up to a green bean forming height of your vines. Other things they leave alone. So that's one good thing about rabbits is they're very specific about what they like to eat.
Awesome. And then my next 2 questions are about weeding. The first question is, what type of tools do you use for weeding?
So your best tools for weeding are at the end of your arms, your hands and fingers. So wear gloves if you can. I like to use a kneeler. So just some type of kneeling pad to save your knees on the ground. So getting down there and just ripping out the weeds at the ground level. But I also love a tool called Cobra Head, which comes in a long-handled version that we use at our community garden plot. And it has a steel tip that looks literally like a snake head. It's a cultivator and a weeder, so you can use it tip-wise to like grab a weed and pluck it out with the roots, or you can use it on its side like a hoe, so you're scraping along and picking up any mini weeds that way.
Interesting. And then my second question on weeding is, what are ways you can use your weeds instead of just throwing them out?
Yeah, so there's lots of great edible weeds. So chickweed is one example. It's rampant at our community garden in the springtime. Once one chickweed goes to seed, you have thousands for years afterwards. So you got to keep on top of those. You can make a pesto out of chickweed. If you have chickens, you can feed them the chickweed. So sorrel, lamb's ear type ones. I was thinking of some other edible weeds that you can enjoy. So eating your weeds is one way to reuse them or combat them. A lot of times, if the weeds are not already forming flowers and seed heads, you can just use them as a green material in your compost pile. So they could just be cut down, like I said, with a hoe or a cobra head or whatever tool you're using, and just leave them in place to decay back into the ground and add organic material, or throw them in your compost pile to process them that way.
Nice. My next question is more about seeds in the DC area, and I was just wondering where you get your seeds.
So I host 2 annual seed exchanges. So we started National Seed Swap Day the last Saturday of January every year. So a lot of the seeds I get for growing through the season come from our seed exchanges. Also, seed companies send me sample seeds a lot. So I'll sort through them and figure that out. Many of them are things that I pass on to other growers to try at the same time that I'm trying it. So if I have like a pack of new radish seeds, I might want somebody else in the region to try them as well. And then I like to order from a couple select sources of favorite seed catalogs like harvestinghistory.com, Renee's Garden is a great one, Botanical Interests, another great one, Johnny's Seed. There's lots of great and wonderful seed companies.
Interesting. And then another question I have is, what is your favorite season to grow in and why?
Well, I love the summer, but is it my favorite season to grow in? Yeah, I guess summer would be it because things germinate so quickly. So if I start a basil seed in the ground at the end of May, say, it might take a week or so to germinate. But if I put it in the ground now, it's maybe even a day or two before it germinates and I see small basil seedlings. So everything is super quick, super easy, and going really well in the summertime.
My next question is about grow lights. I've used them in the past with my indoor plants, and I was just wondering what your thoughts are on using them.
So I'm not a big user of grow lights myself, except for when I'm starting seeds at the kind of end of January, early February for edibles or something that I'm going to grow, maybe some annual flowers. I haven't used them too much for supplemental for house plants, but I definitely think that's a great idea, especially if you are in a dorm room or apartment or somewhere that doesn't have south-facing windows. Then you're really never going to get enough sunlight to do much. So supplemental lights with grow lights are a great idea.
Awesome. And then coming back to my last question, this one's about rainwater collection. And I was just wondering, how important is it to collect your rainwater, if you find it important at all? And then if you ever have experience with rainwater collection.
Yeah, so I'm a big proponent of rain barrels and cisterns. I have one rain barrel that I use predominantly for all my hand watering in the garden. I think plants love rainwater much better than hose water or non-potable water even. It's just not the same. If you get a good rain, it's 10 times better for the garden than artificial watering with a hose. You're never going to have the same effect with that. And I also think that plants like them because it doesn't have chemicals, chlorine or anything like that added to it, or the metals, but it's already what you would say room temperature, like outside temperature, right? So sometimes when you turn on the hose, you get a blast of super hot water because the hose was sitting in the hot sun. Plants never appreciate that. And then what comes after that is cold water, and they're sitting out on a 95-degree day. Who wants to have a jet of cold water on you? So rain is always like the easiest, softest, I think most beneficial for plants.
Awesome. Those are all the questions I have today. Thank you, Kathy.
Thanks, Colin. All right, Ian, how about your round of questions?
All right. So my first question has to do with fertilizer. And I'm gonna kind of list a couple off, but what should you look for in a fertilizer? What is your favorite fertilizer, and how often should it be applied?
So what should you look for is the three numbers. So NPK, and sometimes it'll be something like 10, 10, 10, 10, 5, 10, 10, 5, 25. So that's telling you the different levels of the fertilizer, and you want to look at fertilizers that are higher in nitrogen for foliar plants, say for your lawn. Then you want something that's higher in the others to push fruit growth out. So I would say I look for all organic, usually like OMRI seal, OMRI. So I'm looking for organic fertilizers if I'm using any. I'm normally going to use a slow release fertilizer, in which case those are usually pellets that are covered with clay or something else, so that you would apply them, like sprinkle them around your containers, and then the clay slowly dissolves over several weeks and then starts feeding the plants. So it's giving you a 30-day or 60-day or 90-day, depending on the pelleted form of fertilizer. So that's the slow release. And because I'm a lazy gardener, I prefer it that way, because I know that weeks from now, they're still getting some fertilizer, even if I'm forgetting or not getting time to add liquid fertilizer. So for liquid fertilizers, I prefer for my vegetable garden fish fertilizer, which is, basically processed leftovers from fish. And so it's the blood and bone, good calcium source, great nutrient source. And I usually do a week solution of that when I'm watering once or twice a month. So not doing too heavily. And again, that's only for the fruit producing plants. I don't fertilize like lettuce. Your lettuce greens, most of your herbs don't need that fertilizer. Things in containers are usually heavier feeders, so those might need some extra liquid fertilizer or slow release fertilizer. And then heavy feeder plants, which are your roses, your azaleas, things that have push out lots and lots of blooms. Those I might have a specialty fertilizer, like Espoma makes a specific fertilizer for acid loving plants, or fertilizer for roses. And those are usually a powder or dust form, and you're sprinkling them around the root zone or base of the plant, which brings up another tip, which is using any of the fertilizers, whether the slow release, the liquid, or the sprinkled powder around, is to do it on the root zone, not spraying the leaves of the plant, not dumping them over the top. It's the roots that are being fed, not the leaves.
Yeah, that fish stuff kind of stinks.
It does. That does bring up Ian, not for indoor plants.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
just for your vegetable garden with the fish fertilizer.
My next question has to do with the off season, and it's something that I don't know how many community gardeners address. What do you do with your garden in off season, and do you use cover crops?
So I do use cover crops. So any beds that I'm not wintering over something in, I'll put a cover crop in. So that could be winter rye, winter wheat type of thing, and just seed that in and let that hold in the soil and give back nutrients back into the soil over the winter. Most of my plot, though, I am wintering over something in it. So whether it's a perennial like asparagus that's going to come up in the spring, or I plant garlic in the fall, and then the sprouts come up and just stay at sprout level pretty much until spring. Or I'm doing winter greens, radishes, other things, maybe under a cover cloth. So I am doing lots of cool season crops, and there's not usually too much open space that I'm doing a cover crop in. But where there is open ground between things, so say the garlic, so the little garlic cloves come up and they're about every 6 inches apart, I'm not just letting that bare soil, I'm usually covering it with chopped up straw or other organic material just to keep in the moisture in the wintertime, give it a little bit more warmth, and to keep out the weeds from popping up in the springtime.
Okay, my next question is about pruning, and it's something that I used to practice on the farm that I worked on, is we would prune tomatoes. Do you practice pruning on any of your fruiting plants?
I don't, so I only have a couple fig trees, and they're both dwarf fig trees, so they don't need much pruning. If they were larger or full-size figs or other fruit producing trees, I definitely would be doing at least the late winter, early spring pruning, and then a thinning probably around late spring, early summer. That's not necessary with these new dwarf figs. And at the community garden, I have thornless blackberry bushes that are supposed to be dwarf and not needing pruning too much. They're rampant growers, so I'm cutting them back a lot, cutting out the old canes at the end of the season. The old canes, you can follow those all the way back to the base at the bottom and cut those entire things out. And they usually start to look a little white or cracked along the canes. So you know which ones are the older ones, and leaving the newer, thinner. But even into early summer, it'll start throwing out these giant 5-foot canes and going into the pathways and hitting people. And even though it's thornless, we don't need a giant raspberry, or not raspberry, blackberry hitting everybody. So I am pruning that back every once in a while. And as far as pruning tomatoes and other herbaceous vines, I'm not a big fan or proponent of that. I know a lot of people say to snip out some to concentrate the tomatoes into just a few fruits, and so they'll take out some of the extra vines, take out some of the extra growth to do that. Studies have been inconclusive. No study has shown that it's like really beneficial. So to me, that's kind of busy work. Like, why do I need to do it if it doesn't actually have a proven result? And I'm not trying for that one perfect tomato. I'm trying for as many fruits as possible. Some people will do that as well on, say, melon or pumpkins. Like, you'll take off all the small babies and just concentrate on those few large ones to develop and to give it that way. Again, I'm not trying for that giant prize winning pumpkin, so I'm not pruning the vines or doing anything that way either.
All right, up next is pesticides. And my question is, do you use or recommend using any organic pesticides in your garden if you've been having trouble with pests?
The only one I usually use is, again, the two at the end of your hand and your little fingers to pick off a slug. Prefer to wear gloves, but if you're in the moment and you catch something like a giant tomato hornworm eating your tomato plant, just grab that off, put it in a jar of soapy water, and that's pretty much my organic pesticide there. Stepping on them, like with the spotted lanternfly, trying to catch as many as possible, or in hand pick. The other great thing to use is a strong spray of your hose. So if you see tiny little thrips or aphids eating your roses or on a plant, you can just take a really strong jet of water and knock them off, and then usually they're not going to come back up onto the plant. If it's something larger that can fly, like Japanese beetles, that you're going to have to knock off again into the jar of soapy water or hand pick. The other thing that I recommend for a lot of gardeners is, I had mentioned earlier, cover cloth. So Rime fabric or cover cloth, a spun material that is made specifically for gardening, and that if you use like an old thin sheet or muslin or tulle or something, that would probably rip into strips. But the cover cloth is made with a weaving that doesn't, shear down or strip really easily in the garden. But what it does is act as literally a barrier. So a barrier from moths laying their eggs, a barrier for the flea beetles on your eggplants, especially because, again, hand picking is one thing, but when there's 100 little flea beetles all over your little plant, you're not going to sit there and do that. You're either going to rip the whole plant out and throw it away, or going to wait to see what damage is done and see if a predator comes in, maybe a bird or somebody else will come in and do the eating for you. So that's another thing I do usually, is assess and step back and see. So who is making these holes in the plant? What type of damage? If it's just a little bit, then, we have enough to share. I'm not going to pull out the big guns or pesticides on that. If they're decimating a plant, then I will go to the next step, which is, again, knocking it off with a hose or picking them off or seeing what else we can do.
All right, next is a pretty simple question that everybody needs: pollinators in all your gardens. So how do you attract pollinators to your garden?
So I make sure to plant lots of flowering plants over a long season. So something should be flowering in the garden almost every day of the year, if not multiple things at once. And I make sure for diversity that there is enough of that something. So it's not enough just to have one coneflower or one yarrow plant. Having a good 2 to 3 foot patch of one plant helps a lot. That helps the pollinator be able to come, visit a bunch at once, have enough nectar to go on and do its thing to the next garden. So I feel like there's several beekeepers in my neighborhood, and that they owe me rent from my garden in the form of maybe of some jars of honey, because I do have a steady stream of honeybees coming to my garden and visiting and enjoying, again, a lot of the nectar in my garden. But I'm looking to also attract a wide variety of pollinators. So not just the honeybees, but our native bees, of course, by planting enough native pollinator plants like mountain mint, and also having things for different sized pollinators. The larger hummingbird moths, the hummingbirds themselves, butterflies will get taller, more open plants or tubular plants for the hummingbirds. So I try to have a variety, again, a diversity in the garden of that.
Perfect. So how do you measure soil health in your garden? And if you feel that your soil is unhealthy, how do you correct that?
So first, for soil health, I would notice how the plants are doing. So if the plants are not doing well in a spot, that might be one of the clues that the soil is not healthy. I might take it in have a soil test done and look at those results and see if that's why there's an issue. And for our area, we have a lot of heavy clay. So I know that when I dig in a new bed, I will have to amend it with organic materials. So that could be chopped up leaves that have been partially composted. That could be straight compost, that could be aged animal manure. So I will amend it with that and either just top dress it on the surface or work it in the first couple inches. When I'm planting something larger, so a shrub or a small tree, I'll put maybe a handful of compost or some other organic material in the hole with it. And then add mostly the native soil back in, because I don't want the larger plants to get used to just staying in the small little hole that I'm digging. I want them to expand their roots into the other soil around it. And then as far as the community garden and our plot, we've amended the soil so much over the past 10 years. It started off as a HVAC and plumbing business, and it was a gravel parking lot there for 50 plus years, and it was so compacted. Such horrible soil. It took us a good 2 to 3 years just to have decent soil. I wouldn't even call it good soil, just decent soil, enough amendments that we weren't just growing a tomato plant that had one tomato on it at the end of the season. It was pretty harsh harvest those first few years, but now it's like night and day. It's so great to be gardening in a spot with great soil that we keep adding to every year and adding new compost and new organic material.
It really is amazing how plants can help correct the soil like that.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with Ground Cover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional turfgrass lawn. In the last few years alone, over 23 million Americans converted part of their lawn to a natural landscape, and now they're looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn? Knowing how and when to replace your turf and which plants are the best ones for the job. Ground Cover Revolution is here with all the answers you need, and some you didn't even know you needed. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the specifics on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Ground Cover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Ground Cover Revolution is available now wherever you buy books, including Amazon.com and Bookshop.org.
The McDonald's Snack Wrap is back. You brought it back. Ranch Snack Wrap. Spicy Snack Wrap. You broke the internet for a snack. Snack Wrap is back. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
My next question actually comes from my mom, so shout out my mother. She asked, how often should you trim your hydrangeas down, and what time of the year is best for that?
All right, so hydrangeas are a huge topic, and I'm going to refer your mom to one of our top listened to episodes of all time, which was on hydrangeas, and Lorraine Bellato was the expert I interviewed for that, because there are several different kinds of hydrangeas. So depending on what kind of hydrangea, you will be doing different pruning at different times. The general advice is not to prune out too late in the season. So summer, at the end of summer, when the current blossoms are ending, then you can give it a little bit of a haircut. I prefer to let my hydrangea blooms stay on the plants over the winter time because I like the dried flower head looks. But if you don't, you can tidy it up and give it a little bit of a haircut. But if you wait too long, the buds are already starting to form for next year's blooming on the stems, and then you're cutting off next year's blooms. So that is a mistake a lot of people make with the mop head hydrangeas, which are the most common ones. The hydrangea macrophylla is that they kind of give it a whole over like a third of a cut back the entire plant just to tidy it up. And it doesn't really need that tidying, and it's not going to bloom for you next year. And they'll blame like a too cold winter for it not blooming the following year, when it's in fact that they cut off all the blooms that were forming for next year's cycle. And the good news is for your mom is that a lot of breeding is being done into reblooming hydrangeas. So you've probably heard of the Bloomerang series and a lot of new hydrangeas that are blooming on old, which is last season's wood, and the new wood. So that if you do make a mistake and prune at the wrong time, if you have one of the new varieties that blooms on old and new wood, yay, because then you'll still get some blooming this season. And I'll say for our native hydrangeas, they're usually more spring bloomers. So those you want to do right after they end blooming, or unless you again want to keep those dried flower heads on the plants. And our oak leaf hydrangea are kind of blooming now in summer into fall. And again, I'm not going to cut those back, maybe give them a little bit of a haircut just to tidy them up at the end of spring, early summer, if they start to get a little rampant. And that's just for shaping them.
Well, I will relay that onto her. And my final question is about success in the garden. As I'm sure many of our listeners know, there's lots of ups and downs that come with gardening. And I was wondering how you can measure success in the garden.
It's how many ribbons I get at the fair. No, not at all. I would say I would measure success by what you grew over that season in comparison to previous years. So you're always looking back at previous seasons. But if you're always experimenting and trying something new, that could be different every year. So I recommend looking at and keeping records either digitally on your phone with pictures, or keeping a journal, or I'm doing those weekly Fenton Friday posts on our blog, so I can kind of see from year to year what's going well, what's not going well, and what does better in our region or not. So then I can kind of assess for that. I think at the end of the season, I'm happy if I have a few things in the freezer. So maybe some bags of shredded zucchini that I can use in the wintertime, maybe some bags of blackberries. If I have enough that I'm able to eat it in season, but save some, that means success for me in the edible garden. As far as the ornamental garden, I think my success is when people walk by my house, and some people will stop when they're driving by as well, and they'll shout out compliments, which usually happens almost on a daily basis. Somebody's like, I love your garden, and then keeps walking or running or driving by. Or they'll stop and ask about particular plants, like, where's that? What's that plant? Where can I buy this? What can I do with that one? So that to me is success, is when people compliment the garden.
Thank you. That was my final question.
All right. Thanks, Ian. And Miguel, you're up.
So to start off, we'll start with a pretty basic, but this gets to like the core of the podcast, I feel. So what's your favorite plant to grow in the garden?
Yikes. One favorite. So can
You
I
can
pick
pick a
an
top three.
ornamental and an edible? So this is kind of both, but I'm going to say for my edible, okra, which I'm actually not growing this year. I haven't started any okra because we just didn't have enough space in the plot. But I feel like I'm the okra proselytizer. Like everybody should be growing okra because it's just a fun plant, easy to grow from seed, pretty much set it and forget it, because the work in okra is the harvesting. You have to harvest it almost every other day, or the okra pods get too big and woody, and then it'll slow down its production. But the okra pods are cool themselves, so if you just end up with a few big woody okra pods, those are fun to use for crafting and other things, and you save those seeds to grow okra next year. But I would say my absolute favorite flowers are peonies, and unfortunately peonies don't have any rebloomers yet, knock on wood, that somebody is working on a reblooming peony out there. So peony season is pretty intensely end of April into May. There are tree peonies now, not just the herbaceous peonies that we're growing. So we have a little bit of those at the beginning of the season to stretch out things. But again, peony is a very intense short season in the full gardening.
All right, similar question. Do you have a favorite thing to make from the plants you grow in your garden? Like a favorite recipe or just anything like that?
I was thinking you were asking like a crafty thing, because I was going to say with those okra pods I mentioned before, I made little Santa ornaments for a tree. They're fun to make, and you can look on our blog for the DIY Santa okra craft that I did. As far as recipes, I like to make pesto a lot because that's what I like to eat. I like to use the garlic that we grow in the garden, and that'll make it a really intense pesto to be a garlic pesto with basil. And because I'm trying out different basils, like a lemon basil or a Thai basil, I'll try different type of pestos. I pretty much though like the classic pesto, right? So the classic big leaf Italian basil is, I think, the best pesto out there.
I love a good pesto. My third question, are there any plants that you can grow alongside each other that provide benefits to each plant? Because in the garden we have my tomatoes, and then we also have a marigold that's growing right next to them. And that, you said that helps prevent pests, right?
Yeah, so companion planting, there's a lot of old wives' tales out there that are not accurate, but in this case, it has been proven that marigolds go well with tomatoes. They're a good repellent for some pest insects, and it never hurts to grow flowers amongst your vegetable garden to attract those pollinators. If you're not getting good germination on your tomatoes, your peppers, your cucumber plants, then maybe you're not growing enough flowers around and in the area of those vegetable plants. So those are always good. And we did do an episode with Jessica Walliser. She's the author of a book on companion planting, and it's a scientific-based book on actual research about companion planting. So I recommend you check out that episode, Miguel. That's a really good one to listen to, because again, there's so much out there that's not accurate in companion planting. Like I remember hearing when I was a beginning gardener that roses love garlic, and that couldn't be further from the case. So I would say garlic hates root competition, and you're planting both supposedly in full sun, but when the roses fill out, you're kind of smothering the growth of the garlic underneath, and you're going to have very puny or little garlic, and the roses aren't going to get any benefit from being with the garlic itself either.
Yeah, companion planting is so interesting. It's a lot like animal symbiosis in certain ways.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I was going to say, Miguel, that there's actually the opposite too, which we've never done an episode, but maybe we will at some point, and that's called allelopathy, in that some plants put out through their roots a chemical that discourages competition. So their sunflowers are said to do that. That's one example. So where you have a bunch of bird seed under a bird feeder, like all those sunflower holes, you'll notice it's usually bare. And I used to think that was because the birds are just like scraping off the ground and cleaning it out, but it's really from all those sunflower holes accumulating on the soil and that chemical that's naturally occurring there. Black walnut tree is the most well-known for having this in its root system, because it's very hard to grow anything under a black walnut tree. That root zone is notoriously a killer for almost every plant.
Fascinating. I guess vaguely similar. How do you typically deal with mosquitoes?
All right, so mosquitoes, I'm going to take a drink. Any standing water I'm looking out for in the garden and dumping that right away. So anything from like a bottle cap size up to your gutters, make sure there's no standing water anywhere that would accumulate and allow a spot for mosquitoes to breed. As long as the water is moving, it's fine. If you have standing water that you can't help, say my rain barrel, right? So I have a rain barrel sitting there at the end of my downspout. Then I'm going to put something that's called mosquito dunks or mosquito bits, which is a naturally occurring bacteria that stops mosquito eggs from forming on the surface. So it doesn't kill the current generation of mosquitoes. Mosquitoes will come in, lay their eggs, the eggs break up and don't form. So you're getting the next generation and stopping that from happening. So I also recommend, of course, if you do have something like a rain barrel, emptying it out every once in a while, giving it a good stir, making sure, again, there's nothing sitting there for 5, 7, 10 days that would breed mosquitoes.
Good to know. I've had so many like mosquitoes in the past. They've always been so annoying.
Make sure your
Next
neighbors
question.
too.
Yeah.
Miguel is not, because they generally stay within 100-yard radius. So
Okay.
if there's mosquitoes around you, they're coming from locally. They're not coming from 2 miles away.
Yeah, they're not like bees in that case. Next question. Are there any plants you prefer to keep in pots rather than transplanting them during the summer?
Yeah, there are several that I keep in pots because they are not good neighbors, we'll call it. So mint, anything in the mint family in general is going to be in a pot and separated from other plants. So it'll be just mint in that pot, because if I planted mint with another herb, then it's going to be all mint by the end of summertime anyway. And the other thing that I've learned over lots of years of experience is to make sure to pick up that pot of mint and turn it every once in a while, or move it, because even if it's sitting on concrete, roots will come out the bottom and mint will plant itself and then take over. So mint is one of those super aggressive plants that you want mint for your mojito and for your other cooking and baking dishes, but you don't want it to take over your entire garden.
Yeah, my mom's grown mint in the past, and it took over her entire like upper quarter of the garden. So she's learned her lesson. Do you have a favorite community garden that you've visited for any of these, like anything you've done?
Yeah, so I would say visited maybe a couple hundred different community gardens all over the US and in the Mid-Atlantic region. I've seen really different ways that they're set up. When I was growing up, my grandparents in Germany, outside of Bayreuth, had an allotment garden, and there was basically, I think it was a half acre in size. They had a little small cottage building on it. They had their own stone cistern. They had fruit trees. They had like 2 levels, so kind of a 3-foot step down, so they did herbs below and some other plants above that needed better drainage, and they had a 99-year lease on it. So I love that system. That's mainly a European system of doing allotment gardening, because with that long lease on it, you're going to invest more. You're spending most of your weekends out there. I think people would treat it kind of like their weekend place, even though you didn't sleep in that little garden shed cottage. It basically had like a desk and some storage in there. Most people were spending a lot of their evenings and weekends with their neighbors at the allotment gardens versus in town and in their city apartments. So I thought that was a great system there. And I liked in my grandparents' garden collecting their gnomes and rearranging things, and I was generally there in the off seasons like spring and fall, so it wasn't heavy work. It was more play in those seasons than doing a lot of harvesting or work. As far as community gardens in the US, I just attended in June the Memphis Fling, which started off as a group of garden bloggers meeting every year in a different city and touring gardens. And then in the last couple of years, it's evolved to be anybody on garden social media is welcome to attend the Fling. This year's was in Memphis, as I said, in June, and we went to a wonderful community garden that was on a church property, and it was centered around teaching and education with the church school kids. So the kids were doing it. It wasn't individual plots, but it was a community garden, almost like a small urban farm. And I thought the signage was incredible. They did such a wonderful job with the teaching classroom there. They had like a kind of like a shed with one open side. So they were teaching them how to process their like little blueberry patch. They could bring that into there and then make some blueberry dishes or share them and talk about recipes and how they would prep them. And a lot of the kids who had been working in the garden went on to be interns and even teachers with that garden later on. So I thought that was great that they retained so much participation and that the community was so supportive of this garden. And again, it was on private school and church land that they were able to have so much success in this.
I guess this is not one of my original questions, but following up is how would you recommend someone get started on a community garden if they wanted to bring their own?
So if they had their own piece of land to start a community garden, I would say, depending on where you're located, you might go partner with a local school, local church, and ask if they have any big lawn that they don't want to mow anymore. And that might be better suited for growing food or growing cut flowers or just being a native pollinator garden. It doesn't, for a community garden, doesn't have to be a food production garden, although that's usually what one thinks of, but it can be all of those three things too. So I would say just talk to people about starting to partner up and then start looking at whether there are challenges there. Is there water access? That's going to be your number one challenge. I've been to community gardens where you did have to bring in any water from home, and you would fill up your milk cartons or whatever at home with water and bring them in. That's a lot. It takes a really dedicated gardener. People did it, but having a clean water access is probably your number one thing. Flat as possible, but it doesn't have to be perfectly flat. And then, of course, full sun helps a lot too. And then looking at what your local pest population is. Do you have heavy deer pressure? Do you need a deer fence? What is it like at nighttime there? And what's it like during the day? Is it safe for the gardeners? You want to think about the safety of the gardeners as well.
Yeah, I agree. Because my last question actually links to the safety of gardeners a little bit. So, how do you usually protect from the heat when you're out in your garden? Because I know when you're focused, sometimes you just like completely forget to drink water or something.
Yeah, so maybe setting an alarm helps a lot. So I used to go out in the garden with a kitchen timer. And so I would say, I'll do this weeding for 10 minutes here. And, you get caught up in work and then you forget. And then I'll be across the garden and won't even hear the alarm. And I'll come back and it's have gone off for like 10 minutes or so. You can also do it on your smartphone or whatever else device now that you have on you to keep an alarm. It helps to garden with a buddy. That way you can keep reminding each other and keep each other healthier that way, to say, hey, this is break time, do a little bit at a time and then take some good breaks together so you're accountable to each other. But I would say, once you're getting into a task, it is easy to just want to complete it and not stop midway. So a lot of the times we don't do ourselves any favors by forcing ourselves to finish things all at once.
Yeah, I agree.
Was that your last question, Miguel?
Yeah, I had one more, but it was like I asked my additional questions at community gardens, so.
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay.
A little bit of time.
Which weeds tend to give you the most trouble and how do you deal with them?
Yikes. So used to be, it's funny because it changes every few years, that thistle were a huge problem, especially in my hell strip, the median strip between the sidewalk and the street. We would just have thistles coming up, and they are the worst to weed out because of the thorns, especially when they're even tiny babies, so you'd want to wear leather gloves or something to pluck those out. We've got a hold of the thistles, and now at the community garden, there's morning glory vines that are trying to take over the world there. And I think it's because of the rampant rains and heat we've had. But the morning glories started along our fence line, and they get cut back along the fence line pretty much every week by the lawn maintenance guys from the parks. But as soon as they get cut back there, they send their runners underneath the ground, and we're the next plot in. So we're not the first plot against the gate, we're the next plot in, and I think we are like two ideal conditions, right? So weeds are plants of opportunity, and where we're fertilizing and watering and loving the tomatoes and other plants, that's where the morning glories have decided that's a great place for us to pop up to. The other thing that's popping up all over our plot and in the pollinator strip that I have outside the garden are baby mulberry trees. And that's because there's a large mulberry tree across the street on Fenton that the birds go and eat in the May-June timing, eat the mulberries, and then they come over and sit on the edges of our poles or the plot and just kind of poop out those berries. So there's never a shortage of mulberry seedlings in the cracks and along edges and those are woody weeds, so they're with long tap roots, so those are really hard to get out for us.
Yeah, you mentioned the tree. It reminded me of that one that's like right next to my tomato plants. It terrorizes me
That's a
every day.
mulberry, yep.
Yeah.
And that one, we've been putting, for our listeners, I put an upside down bucket, harvest bucket on it every chance we get. We cut it back to the ground to deprive it of chlorophyll, and it still branches out. It's still like a week later, new branches are coming out underneath the bucket. It's just crazy. And again, because we're all organic garden, we're not going to put like Roundup or stump killer or anything else on it. We're just going to have to keep cutting it back until it finally gives up the ghost.
It can't take a hint.
No. All right. Well, thank you, all three of you, for being interns with Washington Gardener Magazine and the GardenDC podcast this summer. Any final questions for me, Colin, Ian, or Miguel?
No, but thank you so much for having us on. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. I hope you enjoyed the experience and wish you
Thank you.
all the best of luck in the future.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
In the book The Urban Garden by Kathy Jentz and Terry Spate, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the ingenious ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space. No matter what you grow, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
Thank you for listening to GardenDC. This episode was produced by myself, Kathy Jentz, and hosted by interns Colin Davan, Ian Ferris, and Miguel Zarate. Intern Ian Ferris edited the interview. The Let the Sunshine music interludes are by James Mulvaney. If you like this episode, you may also enjoy listening to GardenDC episode 100, Behind the Scenes, GardenDC episode 200, Secrets of a Gardening Podcast, episode 142, Hydrangea Care and Pruning, and episode 51, Companion Planting Strategies. By the way, you can become a listener supporter or subscriber by finding the link in our show notes and signing up there. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to WashingtonGardener.com or WashingtonGardener.blogspot.com. You can find Washington Gardener on Twitter or X, Instagram, and Pinterest at WDC Gardener, and on Facebook at Washington Gardener Magazine. And be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast listening app. Please take a moment to share us on social media with hashtag GardenDC so other gardeners can find us too.